Dina Takruri of AJ Plus interviewed Bernie Sanders, and she gave him some pretty tough questions on the issue of Israel and Palestine.
Last week, you joined every single U.S. senator in signing a letter to the UN Secretary General saying that the institution is biased against Israel and effectively trying to shield it from criticism.
No. I don't accept that. Look, I didn't write that letter. I signed on to the letter. It's not a letter that I would have written. There are many problems with Israel, and I have been critical and will be critical of a lot of what Israel does. On the other hand, to see Israel attacked over and over again for human rights violations, which may be true, when you have countries like Saudi Arabia or Syria. Saudi Arabia, I'm not quite sure if a woman can even drive a car today, okay? So I think the thrust of that letter is not to say that Israel does not have human rights issues. It does. But to say, how come it's only Israel when you have other countries where women are treated as third-class citizens, where in Egypt, I don't know how many thousands of people now lingering in jail. So that's the point of that. Not to defend Israel, but to say why only Israel. You want to talk about human rights? Let's talk about human rights.
Should the UN shield Israel from criticism?
No, of course not.
Okay. This letter also denounces the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement known as BDS. You, in your lifetime, are a longtime proponent of nonviolent protests. This, in the eyes of many Palestinians, is the effective way to get Israel to comply with international law and respect Palestinian human rights. Do you accept that?
No, I don't. I mean, look, I respect people will do what they want to do, but I think our job as a nation is to do everything humanly possible to bring Israel and the Palestinians and the entire Middle East to the degree that we can together. But no, I'm not a supporter of that.
Palestinians will say they've resisted violently, they get punished. They resist non-violently with BDS, they're also punished. We're entering the 50th year in the occupation. June marks 50 years of occupation starting in 1967. We know the occupation has no end in sight. We know that this is a government that doesn't plan on ending it. And talks have failed for a quarter century. What, if not BDS, is left for the Palestinians to do?
What must be done is that the United States of America must have a Middle East policy which is even-handed, which does not simply supply endless amounts of money, military support to Israel, but which treats both sides with respect and dignity and does our best to bring them to the table. Okay?
Just one more question. It's increasingly evident that hopes for a two-state solution are almost dead. At the same time, polls among Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza are showing that they're increasingly in favor of a one-state solution with equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians alike and equal citizenship. Is that something you believe could happen, or is that something you support?
No, I don't. I mean, I think if that happens, then that would be the end of the state of Israel. And I support Israel's right to exist.
Do you think a two-state solution is still viable?
Yes, I think if there is the political will to make it happen and if there is good faith on both sides. I do think it's possible, and I think there has not been good faith, certainly on this Israeli government, and I have my doubts about parts of the Palestinian leadership as well.
You can always tell when Bernie's getting mad because he starts to get, he gets a little red, and he'll end stuff. Okay, wrap it up. Come on. I'm not comfortable here. Let me go. So let's break down some of his answers there. First of all, to the idea of, like, Israel is singled out by the UN. And then, by the way, the letter that Bernie signed on to heavily implied it's because of anti-Semitism. That's why. Well, first of all, they're not singled out by the UN. They pass token resolutions in the General Assembly about Israel. That's meaningless. That's nothing. The Security Council, where the votes matter, there was the one vote recently, and then the last one before that was 2002. So we've shown the infographic on the show before, but the votes in the Security Council and who they go after, you know, when you see the actual countries they go after, Israel's nowhere in sight. So, I mean, it's just incorrect to say, oh, there's this anti-Israel bias. Oh, in the General Assembly, they're passing the token resolutions against Israel. And by the way, why are they even doing that? It's not because they're anti-Semitic. It's because Israel's doing an occupation. They're doing an illegal occupation, and they're stealing more and more Palestinian land, and they have an apartheid-like system set up, and it's in brazen violation of international law. So I mean, like, what do you want them? Do you want them to just go easier on them? I don't. But it's the sickest, oldest trick in the book. Like, oh, it's anti-Semitic that you're going after them. Right, and it's Islamophobic to go after Saudi Arabia. We've seen this play out before. We see how this game is played. And, it's sexist to critique Hillary Clinton. It's a bastardization of identity politics, basically, to make that point. So no, Bernie, there's not like unfair crackdown on Israel. As Israel continues to take more and more Palestinian land as we speak, the concern is like, oh, you're biased against Israel. Please, no. Why isn't your outrage reserved for them fucking continuing to steal the land and continuing the occupation? I mean, Netanyahu, it's preposterous what he's doing. Okay, so, and then let's move on to BDS here. So BDS, Bernie's like, no, I don't support it. And what does he support instead? Oh, an even-handed U.S. policy. But an even-handed U.S. policy to what ends, Bernie? Like, what is... Okay, so we don't have that right now. We don't have an even-handed U.S. policy. We haven't had an even-handed U.S. policy. So what do you want the Palestinians to do? Sit down and wait for a slightly more kind U.S. administration to come in? You know that's ridiculous, Bernie. You've been a supporter of nonviolent movements your whole life, like Dina pointed out. That is a nonviolent movement. So yes, when the Palestinians react violently, they're denounced. And they should be, by the way. I don't support violence either. When they react nonviolently, though, they're still denounced. And they're called anti-Semites. But boycott, divestment, and sanctions, that's just economic pressure. That's all that is. That's the same strategy that worked in apartheid South Africa. We have a similar thing happening in Israel-Palestine, so they're doing nonviolent, basically economic sanctions, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Guess what? That's led to a tremendous flee of businesses from the West Bank. So it's working, and because it's working, that's why you're getting these panicked letters about how, this is an anti-Semitic movement, and it's not a good movement, and why are you doing this? Because they're scared of BDS, because it's working. So, and understand, the goalposts have been moved so far in the direction of the far right of Israeli politics. Even fucking Hamas just came out with their new charter, and they said, okay, look, this isn't a religious fight. This is a political fight. That's what this is focused on. Let's focus on politics here. Drop the religious stuff. We're not against all Jews. We're against, Zionists who take the land. And then they even accepted the 1967 borders. So you have even Hamas is like, okay, 1967 borders. And meanwhile, Israel is pretending, Netanyahu is pretending, there's nobody who's a partner for peace on the other side. When even the extreme factions of the other side are like, all right, we give up 67 borders. So it's just so fucking gross and misleading, and the way it's covered is just flat out incorrect. And you have even Bernie Sanders, who's like the best we have in the Senate, has fallen for the BS and is anti-BDS, and he's pretending there's this giant bias against Israel. So it's sad to watch. And the only point I agree with him on is the two-state versus one-state. There's like this new kind of groundswell of support for a one-state solution. And people go, well, the two-state solution is just not going to happen. Let's keep it real. The only thing that I think is less likely to happen than a two-state solution is a one-state solution. Because let's face it, man, there are such deep political and religious differences among Palestinians and Israelis that you're never gonna get an Israeli government to agree, like, yeah, let's power share with Arabs. It's just not gonna happen. Not gonna happen. What's more likely to happen is, yes, you come up with some sort of a two-state deal, should be along the 67 borders, and, should have independence and recognition for both, and sometimes good fences make for good neighbors, and I build a giant fucking wall between the Palestinian territories and the Israeli territories, and I call it a day. So, and I know that's not a very popular position, or I don't know, it's somewhat popular among people on the left, but there's this new growing movement that thinks the one state's the way to go. I don't think it's the way to go. I think it would lead to many more negative consequences. So that's the only one I agree with him on. He's wrong about the bias. He's wrong about BDS. And it's sad to see Bernie Sanders go down this path when during the campaign he had a bunch of shining moments actually on the issue of Israel-Palestine.